All right, welcome back and welcome to the second video of week 2 for Physics 325 Optics. Today we're going to continue our quest to simplify the mathematics involved with treating light as an electromagnetic phenomena. So we have this three-dimensional electric field, three-dimensional magnetic field, and three-dimensional space, which is satisfying a three-dimensional wave equation. It's a lot of dimensions. It's actually quite complicated to deal with this mathematically. And we're on this kind of quest to simplify it. We already saw that with if we assume a plane wave solution, we can talk about the k vector, which is the direction that the wave is going, and that light is going to propagate along a given direction, and the electric field is going to be doing the same thing in a plane perpendicular to that direction of propagation. So we don't really need to specify every point in space. In fact, it's a very highly redundant solution to the equation. And better yet, we can take one of these plane waves and understand its properties and make any complicated wave out of these plane waves. And what we want to do is replace the wave equation, these plane waves, just with lines, just with rays. And that's where we're going today. Okay? So let's start with our quest for simplifying the wave equation. Okay, so what did we have to start with? We had a three-dimensional electric field, right? So that means it's a vector function and a vector valued function. Each component of the vector, x, y, and z components, were their own scalar functions. Okay, and that satisfies this three-dimensional wave equation for each point. But the point is that if we actually look at what this means, if we actually grind out the math, we actually have three copies of the wave equation for scalar functions. Ex is a scalar function, Ey is a scalar function, and Ez is a scalar function. And we have the one-dimensional Laplacian for each one of these components. So Ex, for example, is a scalar function, but a vector valued function, right? But its value itself is a number, not a vector, right? So we have to give it x, y, and z at a given time, and it's going to give us a number, not a vector. And that is the second derivative of Ex with respect to x squared plus the second derivative of Ex with respect to y squared plus the second derivative of Ex with respect to z squared. Okay, so that's what that Laplacian is actually telling us. And it's the same Laplacian for the y and z components. All right, so three copies of the scalar wave equation. All right, so let's see if we can do it about simplifying this. We're going to assume a plane wave, and here we've written just a general plane wave. It's going in the k direction, so it's k dot r minus omega t. Now k is just some value. Let's pick a name for that direction k. Okay, let's call that the z-axis. It doesn't have to be z, but this is the convention. So we're going to say let it propagate along z, whether it's z or x or y or 30 degrees between y and z. It doesn't really matter. Either way, we're going to give that a name, a special name called the optical axis. Okay, the optical axis is the direction, the axis along which light is propagating. So we're going to let, for example, in this case, the z-axis be the optical axis. And if we recall our nice property of plane waves, if light is propagating, a plane wave is propagating along z, the electric field is going to oscillate somewhere in the xy plane. Okay? So it's going to look like this. This is what our plane wave looks like along our optical axis of z. All right? And our Laplacian now, let's think about this. It's these derivatives here. There's no Ez component, and Ex and Ey are constants. The only thing that has spatial dependence is z in the exponential up here, right? So the derivative with respect to x and the derivative with respect to y are 0 here, and we can replace this Laplacian with a second derivative along z. So that greatly simplifies things, okay? So that's what we're going to do. We have our Laplacian for our plane wave is going to be a second spatial derivative along z, and our light is going to be oscillating back and forth along some axis, right? We'll have a y component and an x component, but it's just going to be going in some direction. Let's make our lives a lot simpler, and we don't have to call it x or y, or we can if we'd like. We might just want to call it y, but let's just look along this dimension and perpendicular to that, there's no electric field. So it's just going to be going along one dimension here. This will allow us to completely neglect the vector character of light. And now what do we have? We have a scalar equation. So if you look what we've got here, we have our scalar function instead of a vector function, and it satisfies the one-dimensional wave equation. All right, this is great. So we only need to worry about one variable, z, and it makes sense intuitively, right? Again, here, if this is my k vector and this is my phase front here, my plane perpendicular to the direction of propagation, it doesn't matter what x and y I choose. All that matters is the variation along z, because if the electric field is pointing this way, it's going to be pointing that same way anywhere in the yz, or in the xy plane, rather. All right, so that's great. And what we have here is what's known as the scalar optics approximation. We've replaced our vector field with a three-dimensional wave equation with a scalar field that satisfies the one-dimensional wave equation, and things are looking good. All right, that's the scalar optics approximation. So we can now replace our complicated field with a single line. This is great. Okay, there's a bit of a issue that comes up. All right, so what does that actually mean? What I've just described is that we have a ray, say it's going along here, and really it's just this plane wave here. So I can write the phase fronts like this. I normally don't have to draw these lines here, but that's what it's representing. Maybe the field is doing something like this. Or similarly, I could have a ray going this way, and that would have phase fronts like this, which would represent modulation of the electric field that goes up and down like this. But this is kind of a problem, right? It's not really a problem if they're going in the same direction. If they're going in the same direction, like this, well, they're both moving along z, and the xy variation doesn't really matter. But as soon as they do something, this, by the way, might be when it hits a lens. We might have a lens here. We've seen this picture before, right, when rays focus. Well, now actually we're no longer, if this is z, this cannot be z. We've actually changed directions, okay? We're now propagating at an angle with respect to z, okay? And our phase fronts, it turns out, are not going to be quite constant here, right? So this is, if we actually try to map out these phase fronts, it would look like they'd have some curvature. So this is an issue, right? We want to do our scalar approximation, but now scalar approximation said we didn't need to worry about the direction because it was redundant, but now it's changing. So how are we going to deal with this? Well, what we can do is we can apply an approximation. It's known as the Paraxial Approximation. And it solves this problem that we have, that when we have a picture like this, we can't have them all along z. If we have rays which are bending slightly at an interface, we cannot have them all along z. And the way we're going to work our way out of this is the so-called Paraxial Approximation. Paraxial literally means near the axis, okay? And this means that all our rays are going to be near the axis, no matter how far away. Even if we go over great distances, we're going to just pick the subset of rays that are near the axis, relatively speaking. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that even if I go a meter away, we're going to be a small, all the rays we're considering at all points are a small distance above or below the axis. All right? So it's really saying we have shallow angles. Okay? So if we have a picture like this, let's consider the general case here. Here's our k vector. We have it, this red k vector is corresponding to here. Now it has a z component, which is going to be k times cosine theta. It has a y component, that's our transverse direction here, and it's going to be k sine theta. Okay? So let's think about what it means to apply the Paraxial Approximation now. So the Paraxial Approximation means that we have small angles. Because we're near the axis, all the angles are small. And that itself is going to have some other spin-off effects, right? So we can, first of all, we can apply the small angle approximation. The small angle approximation, you may have heard, is sine theta is approximately equal to theta. Cosine theta is approximately equal to 1. And if we want a second order correction, the next one is quadratic. It's going to be theta squared. This comes from the fact that sine of x is equal to x minus x cubed over 3 factorial plus x to the 5th over 5 factorial minus ... And cosine x is equal to 1 minus x squared over 2 factorial plus x to the fourth over 4 factorial. I had to think about that for a second, minus dot, dot, dot. Okay, so we're just taking everything up to maybe second order. And that tells us that sine of theta is approximately equal to theta. Cosine of theta is approximately equal to 1. But if we want to go to second order, the lowest order correction is theta squared. And as long as theta is small, this correction will be quite small. Okay, so that's the approximation that stems from the paraxial approximation. It's not literally the paraxial approximation. The paraxial approximation is saying we're taking a thin bundle of rays near the axis. But a result of it, or a corollary, I guess, of it, is that we can apply the small angle formula. And based on our form of k here, that tells us that the y component of the k vector is much, much smaller than the z component. It's almost entirely along the z direction. This is important because now we can apply the approximation that it's mostly moving along the z direction. So let's think about how. Okay, so we still have k. K is still our wave number. K is still equal to 2 pi over lambda. So it's fixed no matter which direction it's pointing. K, that's 2 pi over lambda. But in this case, it's going to be equal to the square root of kz squared plus ky squared. Let's look at the z component of k. All right, so that's going to be equal to k squared minus ky squared, right? Just rearranging. And we can actually pull out a k here. It's going to give us 1 minus ky over kz squared. Or sorry, ky over k squared, just like this. But remember, this ky is small compared to kz and compared to k. So we can use the approximation, the Taylor approximation of the square root here. And that's going to be k1 minus 1/2. This is that approximation of the square roots. K squared over k. Ky squared, sorry, over k squared. And that itself is equal to k minus ky squared over 2k. Or, if you will, we can use ky is equal to k sine theta. Better actually write that pseudo-legibly at least. K sine theta, and that's approximately equal to k theta. Okay? So this is approximately equal to k minus k over 2, or rather 1/2 k theta squared. I guess all we've said here, we've kind of gone in circles. We've said that kz is, if we look at this is actually the cosine approximation. But it's important to write it both ways. Because what this is telling us is that kz is equal to k minus a small correction. Okay? So that's what we've got here. And therefore, k dot r, if I look at that, it's equal to kz times z plus ky times y. If we apply this approximation, we have our usual, kind of our normal kz propagation, as if it was completely moving along the z-axis, right? So even if it's moving at a small angle, this term is almost exactly like it's moving along z, but then we have this small correction. And this correction in the paraxial approximation is going to be small. So what this tells us is that we can pretty much assume that even if it gets shifted up or down a bit at a small angle, it's going to be dominated by this behavior that you'd expect with just normal z propagation. And if we happen to get up and down the axis a bit, we just need to apply a small correction. Okay. So to see how this works, let's apply this to a plane wave here. Let's apply k dot r to the plane wave. So we have e to the I k dot r minus omega t. We're going to work in the paraxial approximation. So let's just plug in what we just found for k dot r. Okay, so I'm just going to brute force plug it in. So we had e to the I k was 1 minus 1/2 theta squared z plus kyy, which is k theta times y minus omega t. All right, and we just grind that out and rearrange it. We have our normal propagation and an extra term here. Okay, so it's almost as if it's the same k vector, but we have a slightly corrected k vector because part of that propagation, part of that phase propagation is going into this direction, but it's pretty much going along z with a small correction. You see that? And then also we have an additional phase based on how far up or down z we go. Okay, and that's this second term here. So we can write this basically, the whole point is that we can write this as normal propagation always along the z-axis plus a phase, an overall phase correction. And this is just a correction based on how much we're propagating, right? So this will go to 0, there'll be no correction right along z. And we basically get the same form if we have slight angles here. We just have to apply an overall phase. An overall phase, remember that's just a delay or an advance of a sinusoidal function, the further away from the axis we get. And this is a paraxial plane wave, okay? Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about in this lecture is another type of wave. It's called a spherical wave. We'll see it. Now we can build up spherical waves out of plane waves. We can build up anything out of plane waves. But sometimes it's convenient to talk about spherical waves because, as we'll see, if we excite an atom, it's going to emit a wave front which looks pretty much like a spherical phase front instead of a plane wave front. Okay, so here's an animation of one of these spherical wave fronts. And look, if we look at the form here, it looks a lot like a plane wave, except instead of a k dot r, which was our equation for a plane, for a constant wave front, we have k, and here's the confusing thing, r, where r is the distance away from the origin here. R squared is equal to x squared plus y squared plus z squared, right? So here's the origin of some distance away. Here's what a phase front looks like at a constant distance r. Okay, so that's this term r here. Okay, so one thing we need to notice is that the wave starts out very, very, very small here. And as it grows, that area increases. So the strength of the field at a given point has to decrease in proportion to the increase in area. So we have to include this little r in the denominator here. We also include a funny term I in the denominator. This is just for convenience because it turns out we're going to need to add it in later. And it's called a Gouy phase. It's an example of a phase that you get this singular point at the origin here. Okay? And this is basically it. This is the form of a spherical wave. So we use it a bit later in the course. One thing that's interesting is that this is only valid in the scalar optics approximation. You cannot have a vector spherical wave like this. Why? Well, remember in space when we actually had to deal with the direction of the field, we found that light was transverse. And you cannot have a transverse field that has like a constant vector around a surface, around a spherical surface, okay? You can't comb a coconut is sometimes how it's said. It's actually a mathematical theorem for it. It's the unfortunately named Hairy-Ball theorem. And what it says is that you cannot comb a sphere, just imagine if it had hairs, in such a way that it doesn't have a vortex somewhere in it. Okay, so you have to have a zero crossing there. So you actually cannot have perfectly spherical coherent emitters in nature without a zero crossing somewhere. But in the scalar approximation, we can talk about it. And what we're going to do and what's on your assignment is typically we're going to worry about paraxial spherical waves. Okay, so waves that have spherical wave fronts, but we're only going to be looking at a thin strip near the optical axis. So that's basically it for this lecture. So in summary, what we can do is we can concentrate and use some of the properties of these plane waves to greatly simplify our analysis. In fact, by judiciously picking our direction of propagation and just writing our equations in terms of that. So if we're looking at plane waves, we really just have a scalar function that we need to worry about. And the second thing we did is we neglected rays that are too far away from the axis. So in other words, we assumed that all the light is going in one direction. We did this mathematically by assuming that all the rays were in a thin strip near the, or thin cylinder, I guess, near the optical axis. And that allowed us to apply the small angle approximation, which allowed us to simplify our math. And basically we could assume that every wave is propagating along one direction. If there's small angles, we can correct for that with phase factors. Okay, so that is the paraxial approximation. And that's it for this lecture. The next lecture, we're going to further this. So we've covered kind of the electromagnetic wave picture and the ray picture. And we're going to formalize these pictures in the next lecture and talk about the third picture of optics, which is photons and a quantum mechanical description of the light. and we will see you then. Thank you.